I was in a comic book store here in Cape Cod and Hyannis in a mall. It's called Newberry Comics, and was blown away because I walked in and one side were hundreds of Funko Pops, which I love,
Sure.
and then the other side was all manga, tons and tons of it.
Yeah.
And I had to go all the way to the back of the store to a very small section to find the American superhero comics.
Oh
But two
man.
shelves. They had no Wonder Woman trades at all
Wow.
from anyone. Um, and it that just spoke to me, like in terms of relevance, right? Like
Yeah.
what is relevant to young people
Yeah.
or consumers in 2025,
Well, I'm a
2024.
consumer, and they need to get those people off my lawn. That's all I'm going to
Yes,
say.
yes. Um, I do continue to believe, even if it doesn't speak to me, that manga speaks to enormous swaths of people, and there are lessons to be learned from that content,
Yeah.
and to be applied
I
to the
think
stuff
that.
that we
Do you
do.
think the DC Ghost stuff is paying homage to that, Randy? I think so.
I don't know. I mean, kind
Like
of.
the Renaissance
I
of Raven is sort of, I think.
I listen to people who are who consume manga, and I love to hear them talk about it and what they say about it, but I don't like it's not for me. I'm not
Yeah,
their audience,
me
and
either.
so
Yeah.
I agree with you, Phil. I think it's important because there's definitely a market for it, and it really is telling some specific stories that some specific people need to hear. But it's I'm a grumpy old man and it's not my it's not my stuff.
Right. The thing that's really interesting, and that I do believe there's a point to that, again, is uh that stuff targets young people in the way the
Hmm.
Titans targeted young people.
Yeah.
And then we
Yeah.
grow up with it. And I think this is true of a lot, like Star
Okay.
Trek and Star Wars and all that sort of stuff, right? So uh once we grow up, we want it to grow up with us.
Hmm.
And I've
We
long
forget.
thought
Yeah.
that's the biggest problem with Star Wars is that material was not created for 40-year-old, 50-year-old men. It was created for like 14-year-old boys.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And the need for it to grow up to take it seriously, I think has not helped that franchise, has not helped that universe. Like
Right.
I have this whole argument that like bad dialogue is part and parcel of Star Wars, right?
It
Like
kind of
everyone's like, oh,
is.
the writing's so bad. I'm like, no, but in that universe, that's how people speak. They
Yeah.
speak like terrible dialogue,
Yes.
and they speak
I
like
love
wooden
it.
actors because that's what the Star Wars universe is.
Oh,
Uh, and so I've had so many arguments with friends like, no, 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 it has to be this. I'm like, dude, you're fucking 50 years old, right?
Yeah.
You
I
saw that
love
movie
it.
when you were 7, right? You thought it was brilliant. Now go back and tell me that that dialogue is brilliant, please.
Right. It's so true. Well, and even going back and reading those old Titans issues that I just did, even Marv Wolfman's dialogue, every time he mentioned Raven, it was like Raven appears in an ebon cloud of smoke. Like those three words were always there. But you saw just like you saw George Perez's art develop, you saw his writing develop as well. Um, have have you ever considered, or if DC were to come to you and ask you to draw like or come up with a 6 issue mini of Raven, what kind of story about Raven would you want to tell?
So I was thinking about they'll never come to me because I'm way too slow. I'm a terrible,
Okay, three
terrible.
issues.
Yes, I mean, I could maybe be a consultant on it. It would take 2 years for those issues to come out, although they'd be probably very beautiful.
Yes, they would.
Uh, I was thinking about this when Tom Taylor took over the Titans, and it wasn't hitting quite the way they thought it was because there is something in the Donna Troy story that if it lands could launch a whole bunch of new stories out of it. There's a nice little surprise in the back, which I'm super keen on. Um, and I would love to have gone. The editors on those books were JLA Titans people, like so that's their era of Titans. I'm like, well, I worked on that. I could help you, right? Like if that's what you want to
Yeah.
bring back, I know that version of the world. Uh, one of the things that's been really difficult, maybe not the answer you need to hear, was because that Beast Wars, Beast World miniseries did not do so well. The big crossover
Yeah.
last year
Oh
did
yeah,
not.
yeah, yeah.
They were gonna. I think the plan was DC was gonna make Titans their next big franchise for 2025,
Oh,
but because sales didn't support it, I think they pulled back on those
Oh no.
ideas. So I was gonna go in. I was gonna offer a bunch of help, and the thing about Raven to me, so I was going to back to basics, right? Like, so I've been doing all this, of course, Donna research, and I'm always trying to find that one story that hasn't been told, rather than sort of
mm,
rehash the story. Like, what's up? Like, and I was sort of amazed. So when I was working on Spider-Man all those years ago, and I was like, Craven has all these sons. Who's the mother? And she'd never been invented. She'd never been addressed. He had three kids, and so
uh-huh.
I got to invent Craven's wife, basically, who Greg Rucka took and then sort of spun a whole long story out of. But I was like trying to find those bits, and so I was rereading the Games graphic novel, and I forgot that Raven's siblings were introduced in that story.
Yeah.
Um, and then to be fair, I'm cloudy on a lot of her, how the goth version of her aligns with the sort of pre-rebirth version of her.
Yeah.
Uh, like I just found out about how Cyborg's origins sort of align and all the work they had to do to make both versions work, and it kind of blows my brain. But the thing with Raven is, again, I'm an '80s Raven. I
Hmm.
think there's a version of her. I mean, she was super angsty. She's just '80s angsty, right? Like, I don't think
Yeah.
she's so misaligned conceptually with angsty modern Raven. I think it's a dialogue issue. I think it's an appearance issue. Um, she's still the daughter of Trigon, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
he is.
Yeah. She
Yes,
better be.
Right.
he is.
Um, I was really bummed though to find out like Trigon's been brought back like three times. So, like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
um, but it feel I am particularly because of the family ties of the Titans. I'm always really most fascinated by digging into their families and finding that one story or that new special story. It's very soapy, but people are like, oh my god, that's her sister. Oh my god, that's her father. I mean, we all love that.
Yeah.
I think the hard thing for me to really align is that I think in current continuity, she and Changeling were a couple because they were on the cartoon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's very, very like I don't know how to
Yeah.
work with that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's not one of my favorite things that made it back into the comics. It was
No.
great for the show, but yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I I I'm still a, star-crossed lovers Wally West Raven, that he was mad at her, that she manipulated him, and
Yes.
all of
It's great.
that's what I
It's
want to
great
hear.
stuff.
Yeah, it is.
Also,
And very
just
soap opera.
I think again, and I keep harping on this, but there's a physicality to that couple that
Hmm.
makes sense. But I mean, I guess the Raven Beast Boy cartoon, those, I mean, they're little tykes. I guess
Yeah.
that makes sense too. Ultimately, the Raven story, I was thinking about. I'm not going to tell you. I'm going to hold it, but a lot of it had to do with digging back, like rereading some family bits and being, oh, that's really interesting. Oh, there's something there. I'm trying to. I love like the thing I did with the Donna story is essentially meld a couple of versions. It's very not continuity driven. The only continuity is because they reestablished that she's Wonder Woman's adopted sister. I'm like, great, we do that very quickly, and then we
Yeah.
move on. Like, I'm not interested in her origin except for how it plays into this whole human theme. And with Raven, I would want to do something similar. Like, what are the versions? Let's mix them, or like let's take the best parts of them and then move on and tell some story.
You know,
Uh,
it's weird. The older I get, the less I actually care about continuity, and the more I understand that just tell a good story,
right.
right? Like, it. I I'm okay with different continuity because I'm probably not going to read it. I'm going to read the things that resonate with me, and the rest of it I'm just going to let go and not get on my keyboard and tell everybody how they're wrong.
And I'm still Johnny DC continuity cops deputy.
Well, the reason continuity matters to me is because I'm an inside out sort of person with characters, so their experiences lend to who I'm talking
Right.
about at any
Their
particular
truth.
moment.
Right. And if
Yes.
there's
So
so
if
many truths, how
Grayson's
do you get there?
experiment, right? So if Dick Grayson is Robin for 6 months as opposed to 6 years, that's a radically different
Sure.
character.
Sure.
Um, I don't really. I always say I don't really care. I just want to know what it is. And I
Hmm.
think editorially, there's still some confusion about certain characters because the two versions just don't jibe. And so they're kind of like, well, it's a little bit of this, a little bit of that. And I'm like, I don't really care. Just tell me what I'm working with,
Yeah.
and then I will work with that. And
Yeah.
if you don't know, then can I fix it? Because
Which
I'm not going to hurt your character.
Yeah.
right. And you've done such a great job at that in the past. I mean,
Right.
when you went into Wonder Woman, the monthly, and just brought in even reconciling some of the things that were not my favorites and being able to reconcile them into one continuity, it was a beautiful thing, and you did it so well to be able to tell the story that you did.
Was masterpiece.
Well, the one thing I like, I'm very so the nice thing about that Wonder Woman run, as you both know, the first year of that Wonder Woman run was really hard editorially. I was challenged like every issue over and over and over in ways I didn't think I needed to be, and which were really sort of really undercut my confidence in storytelling for a long time. But a couple choices I made, which were reviled at the time, people have really come around to, and I'm like, yes, yes, yes. And one of them was, of course, turning Vanessa into Silver Swan
I
because
love.
there was an in universe reason for that, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
and it's funny because it was made a textual because it's about John Byrne essentially, ignoring her.
Right. Yeah.
And then, but even looking back at George Perez's run, like it was all that material was there, and
Yeah.
so it felt really, really easy. And the thing, Silver Swan was never one of my favorite characters, and I wanted to make a villain that was intimately tied to Wonder Woman, and it just seemed to work. Um, and again, because Byrne had given me all the ammunition I needed to sort of make that character make sense. And boy, did people hate that. And I remember Greg Rucka hated it and like tried to undo it as quickly as possible. But it's only been in recent
Hi.
years. People are like, oh, that was really good, or like, oh, I
Was.
get it now.
It
Um,
was very smart. Very
because
smart.
they got
And the boots. And the
and the
boots.
boots, her S&M boots.
Yeah.
Because I think they understood the soapy part of it, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Like, um, and there is that interesting thing which didn't used to be a problem, and I feel like is now more of a problem in storytelling, where uh characters, heroic characters or characters we like can't be wrong, which feels like that also comes down from movies. Like big action heroes can't lose fights in certain cases. Like
Right.
I forget who it is, who plays Black Adam.
Oh,
The
The
Rock.
Rock. The
The
Rock.
Rock. Yeah.
So it's rumored that he can't lose a fight in a movie. He can
Right.
come to a standstill, but he can't lose. So there's no stakes for that, right?
Yeah.
And I love it when a character, and again, I come from the world of soap operas where characters were wrong all the time and they made really bad decisions, and then they had to pay for them, and then that's how we learned to love them again.
Yeah.
And I think there's something really powerful about that. And so I think my experience is a lot of people hated it when their favorite characters ended up doing stupid or bad things.
Yeah. Anthony, I'm about to tee you up for something
Okay.
because there was a part of your Wonder Woman run that I had a really hard time with until very recently, and because I didn't in continuity, I didn't like Hippolyta being Wonder Woman in the
Oh,
past, right? Like, so that was a thing, and the way that you reconciled that, and the fact that you had this whole jealous daughter mother thing, and it was so uncomfortable for me to read the first time that the subtext I really didn't get. I didn't get any of that. And it just made me uncomfortable to read and to look at. And so I just kind of dismissed it. I thought it set up her death really beautifully, but still it was very hard. And it was not until I lost my own mother, that it really the first time I read it again after I lost my mother, that I understood the story that you were telling, and you did it so beautifully, and it was great to have that catharsis. So
So the question he's teamed me up for is I've seen in social media, and we may have chatted or text several times about your relationship with your mom,
Sure.
and so tell me how has she influenced your storytelling and your the relationships of your characters and the characters themselves? And is there a specific project where like you really imbued it with her, or that maybe in after, looking back on it, you really see her presence strongly?
So there's a couple answers to that. I wanted to the Wonder Woman Hippolyta conflict. So I actually think, Randy, your reading of it is fair because that was supposed to be a year-long story
yeah,
Oh,
about
okay.
Diana's resentment towards Hippolyta for essentially being a better Wonder Woman than she was, right? So it's all
right.
made textual. Um, the problem, of course, was that our worlds at war landed, and they're like, "Are you going to have to kill Hippolyta halfway through your run?" So my original pitch, it meant that I only had half. I had half the issues to tell that story.
Hmm.
So I've long complained that my Wonder Woman run was really marred by these bizarre pace issues
Yeah, sure.
because different editors were involved. Our Worlds at War came, so that the Civil War was supposed to be 3 issues, not two. So that became a super dense, jam-packed story because I needed to get to the next stuff so I could kill Hippolyta off. And so I actually think your assessment is very fair that uh, I don't think that was a well-developed animosity
Sure.
because I suddenly had to truncate it by half
Yeah.
and just try to make it work to make that death
Interesting.
scene work. Um, but that relationship between Hippolyta and Diana was a reflection of the relationship with many women in my family. Mothers and daughters did not get along, and also it was sort of like a callback to the '80s Silver Age Hippolyta and Diana. Because I don't even remember, but like during the original Crisis,
Yeah.
Hippolyta and Diana were fighting.
Yeah.
And it was about Hippolyta's interference in Diana's life
Right.
and stealing her memories. And because Silver Age Hippolyta was a crackpot.
Yeah, she
But
was.
and so I wanted to call back not necessarily that, but that those characters have been in conflict before,
Hmm.
especially during times of crisis, like Our World's at War. But also because in my family, women never got along. The mothers and their daughters fought constantly. My mother and my grandmother hated each other. And I don't think I'm overstating it or disliked each other strongly and resented each other their whole lives. Their last conversation was literally a fight. Like you hear
Hmm.
that cliche all the time, but my mom was dying. They had a terrible fight, and then my mom died 2 days later. That was and then my grandmother barely noticed. It felt like that, her daughter had died. So the thing that I was trying to play in Wonder Woman was the conflict that I often saw in my family between mothers and daughters, and that I'd heard. I lived with a woman for a time in New York. She was my roommate. She and her mother were both really close and often in conflict. The mother daughter relationship, as I've understood it, is often fraught with conflict and sometimes jealousy. I also really like the idea that Diana was kind of jealous of her mom because
Yeah.
she was restricted in a way that her mother wasn't. It's a
Mhm.
little bit like current politics where one party tries to do right by the rules and the other's like fuck it, we're just going to do this right, and
Yeah.
are way more effective in their way because they're just going for it, and the other is much more concerned about like rules and norms and all that kind of stuff. And I think that's how I was playing them. And so Diane at the time had that terrible reputation for being such a Pollyanna and being, I forget, the
Hmm.
Mary Sue, etc. And so I liked, but that character also had a history of anger. She was highly competitive. I can't remember if Mark Wade wrote this before or after I got on Wonder Woman, but that I think that Batman's protocols for her were linked to her competitiveness. Like in the Tower of Babel storyline,
Oh yeah.
I'm pretty sure she was defeated by her that need to compete. And I
Yeah.
love that through line for her, right? Like
Hmm.
she got off the island because she wanted it more than anyone else.
Right.
Like she was like
It,
competing, like she was going
it
to
was
Interesting.
win.
yeah,
Wow.
it was not just competitiveness, it was ambition,
It was ambition, right? And
Yeah.
so in my head, here's this incredibly ambitious, competitive woman, and then her mother shows up, and at least in canon, her mother's doing a great job at the job that she has not always been so good at. I loved that. I was like, oh my god,
Yeah.
that's so good. And then again, thinking about my own family and their relationships and just sort of sopping it on. What I will always be sad about, and I still think about it 20 years later, 24 years later, is that that story was supposed to run for 12 issues. And then it got cut into 7 because I had to kill her off. And I had no
Oh,
choice. I had no choice in the matter.
oh,
That
And so,
sucks.
so a lot of
Isn't it?
stuff got condensed. A lot of conflict got sort of thrown out. It wasn't as
It
nearly
was
as
still,
developed.
I'm sure you're disappointed, but I love
yeah.
that run, that
It's
story. I
yeah.
really liked it. I'm sorry that happened to you though.
I
I
think I think there's good stuff. When I look back on it in hindsight, I think there's good stuff there. I think there are good character beats. I'm just saying I think it's a fair assessment. Like, and the other thing that happened, I've told the story many times, but I was told over and over and over by editorial that I had limited time on the book because Greg Rucka was going to write it. I was just his fill-in until he was ready.
right.
So the first 6 issues, I was supposed to wrap. Everything gets wrapped up because I was supposed to wrap up for him, but it took him over 2 years to get on that book.
Oh,
So that happened to me 5 times. Where, and the biggest
oh
one was
my.
like I blew up Themyscira in Our Worlds at War,
Yeah.
thinking that was it. I was done, and they're like, "Oh no, you can stay on." And I said, "Can I recreate Paradise Island?" They said, "Yes, but you have. That's got to be your last issue." So I was like, "Okay." So I recreated it very quickly.
And beautifully.
I'm actually pretty happy about it. And then I thought, okay, I'm done. Like, actually, you have 5 more issues. It's like, what are you talking about? And then at the end of those 5 issues, they said, can you stay on for another 5? And then I did. And they're like, do you want to stay on for more? And I'm like, no, because they keep doing it's like stop, start, stop, start, stop,
Right.
start. And then this guitars, I had to do a fill-in issue to expand it for a trade paperback. And like, but it doesn't make it, there's nothing there. So we had to get a fill-in artist to do
Yep.
a chapter where nothing happens to pack a trade paperback that's never seen print. Um,
Frustrating.
it was a really bizarre time,
Yeah.
and the editor in chief and I just never got along. And part of that, I honestly believe, was he was very straight. I was very gay. I was an uppity gay for sure. I was a queen to do what he wanted.
Okay.
He was a meat and potatoes, like Irish Catholic from Brooklyn. Like,
Hmm.
just in
Okay.
terms, I would not say he was. I would never ever say he was ever homophobic to me, but certainly our sensibilities and traditions were very different. And the sort of storytelling I wanted to do and the sort of storytelling he wanted were just so different that we just fought all the time. And it's reflected in that in the run in Wonder Woman.
Now, you may not be able to confirm this, and I may have just heard a rumor, but I kind of remember at some point there was talk that Greg Rucka was going to write the book, and you were offered to keep drawing it for him.
I don't remember that. It's
Okay.
very possible.
Okay. Okay.
10 years ago, I might have had that memory. It is gone
Yeah.
from my brain forever.
No, that's fine.
Oh, I hear
But
you loud and clear, Phil.
Right.
yeah, well,
Phil,
I
you,
just because I remember, his first issue was destroying Paradise Island, and it just like killed me.
Did you
That
guys
that
read that my Pride issue, my Pride story?
yes.
yes.
Yeah. And so it was interesting because I got to deal with that because I remember creating the mascara completely ill prepared for how easily it could be destroyed.
Yeah.
It never even, I was just like, oh, Harris stomps it out of the sky. What? And
Right.
I thought about that Paradise Island so much and like the design of it, the works of it. And it never occurred to me, I know it sounds really stupid, that it could be destroyed in stories so easily.
Yeah. Yeah.
And and I was just like, wow, that's a real bummer. But DC, oh, they hated it. Like they could not wait to get rid of that Paradise Island.
You're kidding. Oh
Oh, they
God.
hated it.
Oh,
Because that was the
Why?
regime. That was like the Didier regime, and a Paradise Island like that. to them had no conflict. It was too perfect.
Oh, oh, that's so sad. That's so sad.
Okay. Okay.
Th but thank you for the Pride story because it was nice to revisit and go back,
Yeah, and I again, like for me, that was a big. I really that hit really hard when they did that because part of that new Themyscira was also a comment on the sort of world I wanted to live in post 9/11,
right, right.
right? Like so,
Aspirational.
it was
Right.
aspirational.
Right.
And then they're like, no, that's not what we're gonna do. And I think a lot about had that world existed a little bit longer. Again, that's one of those things where people hate, a lot of readers disliked it too, and have come around to it since. And so
Mhm.
I feel some satisfaction, and maybe I was just a little ahead of the game. That's a lot of ego. I don't mean it to sound like that, but
Nah.
like things have to hit at the right moment to sort. They just have
Yeah.
to land, and I
Yes.
think I was just early.
Yep. I
Randy,
agree.
may I?
Yes.
Because speaking of homosexuals, your
What?
work has been
Homosexuals?
really important, Phil, in like making space for LGBTQ plus people, in my opinion. You know, your characters and your stories represented us, but hearing what you just said, you know, what's a change or, okay, first of all, what are you most proud of in that kind of work and what still needs to be done? What's something maybe you wanted to do and weren't allowed to do in terms of, LGBTQ pushing us?
Uh, I got a lot of. I was shocked at the pushback I got when I was doing Superwoman, also another nightmare editorial
Oh, I
story.
love that book.
I loved
Yeah.
that book for the first three issues, and then again, we'll talk about that another time. But because it was sort of a reboot, rebirth, I was making Natasha and Tracy Six a couple, Tracy 13 a couple, and it was just sort of this background thing, and I thought it was really sweet. And it was the first time I was ever like, I ever heard editorially like, why are you doing this? Do they need to be gay? Is this part of some agenda? That's a paraphrase, but like that was the
Yeah.
my entire career. I've never experienced that. But it was also the first year of the Trump administration. And I was also told editorially that we had to start making more content that appealed to Trump voters and like middle America. And my assumption, what they were not hostile to this idea, but I couldn't believe they were asking me like, well, what's this about? What are you doing? Because I'd never been confronted with that before, ever.
Wow.
Um, and I was generally surprised. So anyway, I think just the thing I'm most proud of, if that's the right word, is I've been like an out gay guy in comics for 35 years, right? Like
Yeah.
it's less about, and I think that permeates the content that I do. So there's a lot of queer content out there,
Love that.
just in terms of spirit, more than specifics. I talk a lot about this on panels now, where I'm like the elder statesman, because I'm the old gay granddad, but
Elder gay.
I'm an elder gay.
Elder gay.
I'm really fascinated by the need now for young queer people to see very specific versions of themselves. And I'm really lucky. I've said this a million times. I got to see myself on TV. I got to see myself in books. I never gravitated to characters who looked like me. I gravitated to characters who I felt like me or I felt akin to them, right? So mostly female characters, often characters of color, etc., characters with certain powers or backgrounds. But uh, I always say that I was attracted to a sensibility,
Hmm.
and now it feels like people are much more attracted to specificity in terms of representation.
Yeah.
Like they want to see them, uh, and I'm using this as an example. I will probably get in a lot of trouble. Please cut it if you think you need to. But it's sort of like I'm a person of color in a wheelchair and I'm left-handed. I want to see all of those attributes in this character,
Yeah.
and because that is me. And I think there's something incredibly valid about wanting to see yourself represented. I I just never occurred to me. I don't,
I agree with you, but I think like I don't feel I've ever seen me, and I'm a white guy, right? So how can we make all these infinite variations of people to see themselves. You know,
Right.
it's kind of hard. I hear it.
But there,
It's very valid to want to see that.
and I
But
think that's why the sort of indie queer comic scene is so big because they're able to
Mhm.
niche so much, and
yeah,
Right.
okay.
so many of these permutations end up in those books, which I'm really pleased for. Uh, it's just not something I've ever really required. Like,
Yeah.
and I've told this joke many times, but like the reason I loved like Dynasty or Dallas is because it was clear those shows were written by a bunch of gay guys doing coke, right? And like staying up till 3 in the morning writing their scripts and having Alexis fight whatever, the other Carrington and roll down the hill, like so gay. So I didn't get
Right.
to see myself in that because the entire thing was a
Sure.
reflection
Okay.
of
Yeah.
sensibility. It was me.
There
Uh
was a specificity, but also a universality about the whole thing because, and we are all of a
I
certain
love that you
age,
pulled
but
your
we also
shoulders when you talked.
it was
right
very
shoulder
You
pads.
did your crystal
shoulder pads.
shoulder pads. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, shoulder
Crystal. Oh
pads.
my god, I couldn't remember her name. Um but I think I've been thinking about this a lot. So anyway, because this is so strange. But I was never driven to make like a specifically gay character. I was much more interested in queer characters. And like one of the reasons I love Tempest was because in my head that character is he's not an alpha male. Like he's a fairly gentle guy. I
Hmm.
think he would register as queer to most people,
Yeah.
even by sexual orientation. I think he's straight. Um, but like he's not out there like like Wolverine. And he was impossible for so many writers to write because they don't know how to write a gentle guy with massive amounts of power. Right?
Yeah.
That's an alien concept to them.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so true.
Or like a guy who has lots of power and is like, I don't need to use this right now.
Hmm.
Right? Like that is because I think so many of the guys, and I mean this specifically, the men writing these books and drawing them are like that power fantasy is so important to them.
Yeah.
And clearly, I love a good power fantasy story, but at this age, I'm much more interested in the human stuff. And I think I'm just trying to think of my favorite Wonder Woman stories. Although that's so super super random, I love this story, and I think because it's this is a version of like just a superhero like beat 'em up. It was Wonder Woman 23 and 24, and it's when Uriel the Gorgon releases Ixion in Boston, and it's
Oh,
just this giant monster like it's like a Godzilla story, and Wonder Woman has
right.
to
Yeah.
fight Godzilla in the
Great.
middle of
Yeah.
Boston Harbor. And there's not much to it than that. It's just high adventure, and I love that story.
Yes.
It's not particularly deep. It's not meaningful. It's scary. I think the way he did the Gorgon is fabulous. Um, and so that's kind of a rare example of like just a high adventure story that I just for whatever reason I just love it. I think I love the art and design in it, but for the most part, I tended to be a character person. Like I was just really I meaning character. I really loved character driven stories. Crisis, of course, I love because of its scale, but at the end of the day, it was those character moments that were so
Hmm.
important. And I always say that the Legion I loved, there were certain like high concept science fiction ideas. The story I talk about all the time is Legion of Superheroes 50, the Baxter edition, where four Legionnaires go to fight the Time Trapper at the end of time, it's a pure science fiction story.
Yeah.
I love that story because it's just like there are concepts in there that I had not experienced before. But generally, I also loved it because I loved those characters so much. Because
I
because the character bits and moments that Paul and the artist had given them over the decades that I had read it made that story matter.
Well, it's not just the throwbacks, but yeah, you're right about that. But just being able to have these little quiet moments, which I think is something that Anthony was talking about earlier, we don't get so much of because we
Right.
don't have as many panels or as many pages. But just being able to have, that little quiet conversation in the corner
Right.
that's maybe 3 word bubbles, but it adds so much
Right.
texture to the story.
Yeah. Randy, I only have one more question. I don't
Okay.
do you have any others? Did you want to
Well,
keep?
no, ask your question, but I have one
Okay, so
thing to
Phil,
say to wrap it up. But go
if
ahead.
if I were a billionaire, I would give away all my money to help others. I wouldn't keep it, but I would save enough to fund a 12 issue miniseries that you would write and draw, which would the absurd premise would be that Midnighter and Supergirl somehow are compelled to be roommates in a two-bedroom apartment for 1 year. And it's a odd couple kind of story, but there's also some deep stuff to it. These two people are like, how do you when you're like out of place, how do you find a sense of belonging? When you're invulnerable, how do you deal with being a vulnerable person? So I'm not asking you to comment on that. I'm just trying to add to this kind of crazy story. If you could, what kind of project have you thought of over the years that if you could just do it, go, Phil, don't worry about it. DC will cover the everything, do what you want. What would that project be? And they're not going to critique you, no editorial cues, just do what you want. What would the project be?
The only thing left. So there are only two things left I really want to do at DC. I'd like to do Titans Run. Uh, I would really like to do. I really want to come back and do Historia. I have to do more. But in terms of your question, I mean, the thing I really, really want to do, and it would be invalid the minute it came out, was a new history of the DC universe.
Oh,
Oh,
yeah.
Um,
interesting.
uh, I would love to see what that looks like now compared to what it looked like in 1986. And given 12 issues, that could be like a really extraordinary volume.
Okay, they could be double-sized issues too, Phil.
Yeah,
Yeah.
This
but
isn't
like
my money.
um, there's something really interesting to me currently about chronology. There's something really interesting to me again about continuity, but also that for honestly, I think the real reason I would want to do that is because I would get to draw everyone.
Yeah.
Like there
Yeah.
would
Okay,
like
I'm down. If I win the money somehow,
yeah, no one. No, I think
but you have
in
to
a
put a
project
gay
that
Gorgon
large,
in it for Randy. That's all.
a what?
A gay Gorgon for
Done.
Randy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Easy.
Yes.
And I'm also thinking about what I doing that post Historia, like what I've learned now about drawing and design and what working on Procreate allows me to do in terms of texture and tone, et cetera, like that. I'm like, I think that work would be really cool looking.
That's
Yeah.
awesome.
It would.
Yeah.
That would be amazing. And we didn't get a chance to talk about Historia enough, but
It's beautiful.
God, Phil, that was
Yeah.
so beautiful, and that you got to not just draw, but come up with the concepts with Kelly and create what they were going to look like for the other artists to follow your template, and they were so wonderful. I think it's where my obsession with peacocks started, was all the peacocks around Hera, because they were
Same.
yeah, well, yeah,
Hera was super fun because Kelly Sue and I both decided she would never be wear the same. It was a little bit like Queen Amidala. She would never wear the same
right,
outfit in this and two scenes. And part of that
yeah,
was just fun, and part of that is because she is a queen. Like she's still
yeah,
kind of a bitch,
Right.
and I was like, great. So like every time she got to appear, it was in something new, and I loved that little bit. But designing those characters was really I was really proud of that work. But I was also what Kelly Sue. I always say I've said in every interview that book exists because I just wanted to impress Kelly Sue because I love her so much. Like every line, everything was just about impressing her and making her happy. Like that was her interpretations of those characters, which I have to say took me a minute. We had some really great discussions, particularly about the notion of feminism and righteous anger, which was really hard for me.
yeah,
And her
yeah,
initial take on the Amazons, which felt very harsh to me based on
yeah,
what I knew. And then once I understood them, and then once I was like, oh, a woman is telling me this, maybe I need to listen to this, right? Maybe like,
right.
especially a woman of her caliber, like how much she knows, it completely changed my thinking about the Amazons, the gods, all of it.
Well, it was a great reimagining. It was just a beautiful story from beginning to end, and I'm so thankful. I actually have a one of your concept sketches of Daddy Aries. Uh,
Who was
it,
based on a former student of mine, by the way.
I was gonna ask who
Yeah.
that reference was, and could I get his number?
He is married, but I will let him know. The thing I like to say about Aries is that what we agreed upon with Aries, and a lot of it had to do with the sexualization of violence and sexualization of war.
Yeah.
So Aries is like that fucking hot frat boy that you know is a racist and you know he's
Uh,
probably assaulted some women, but he's just like he walks in the room and you're like, God damn, he's hot. Like that was our take on like that weird conflicted
oh yeah, he is
thing
definitely.
that we have with violence and that coarseness and but like the right guy walks in even holding it, you're still like, oh my God, he's the hottest serial killer. Like who
It,
was it? Or like even the dude that shot the CEO, right? And
oh
with
yeah, Luigi. Yeah.
yeah, and it was like
Yeah.
he's gonna have his OnlyFans like really soon, like whatever.
Right.
Even after he murdered a man, right? Like and beyond the politics of that, I just think it's really funny, like how what what happens to us when people have a certain physicality, what we will
Yeah.
forgive them,
Yes.
or what we will eroticize. And I think, and so that's where Aries came from.
Well, you definitely succeeded
Thank
in
you.
all of those things.
Yes.
Well, I want to thank you. This has been just phenomenal. And so just regardless, it's great to catch up. I would like to close this by saying, you in that podcast that we mentioned earlier today, there was a lot of talk of joy, and not only does your work bring a lot of joy to a lot of people, including the two people here, but it's the work itself is imbued with this joy that comes directly from you. That joy is so apparent when we get to spend time together, and even when it's over a text. But and thank you for that because it's such a rare thing, and to me, it's also such a queer thing in a world that is
Yes.
trying to take things away from us and rob us of that joy. What you're doing is putting that joy back out there in the world, and thank you so much for that.
Thank you. There, a long time ago, I read something. It was a think piece about the political power of joy. And at the time, I think I dismissed it. I was troubled by the frivolity I saw, and primarily, I want to say gay male culture, gay male
Hmm.
culture, which felt inappropriate to me, particularly in times of sort of political upheaval and violence. I wanted everyone
Yeah.
to be very serious about
Yeah.
things.
Sure.
And then I got to thinking about the act of joy as political, as an act of resistance, and it became a very important idea to me. So it is. I'm glad you keyed into that because I do think it has been very easy for many of us to have had the joy robbed from us, and I think it's very dangerous. And so to experience joy of any kind, like and kind of revel in it, like I think there's real power in reverie. So um, I'm grateful that you picked on that. And I do hope people, particularly queer people, when they experience true joy, um, like revel in it because
Yeah.
it's really amazing and do their best to spread it.
Absolutely. Well, we will be spreading your joy all over the interwebs when we get this edited.
Well,
Uh,
thank you.
yes,
Oh, thank you
Anthony.
again for your time today.
It's been
Everything
great
Randy
talking to you,
said.
boys.
Yeah.
I'm very, very happy to see you again
Oh,
in my
It,
little box.
there you
yes.
Terrible light. Oh my lord, this light's terrible.
go.
But it's really good to see you.
It's good to see
Awesome.
you too. And until next time, Anthony.
We will see everyone on the other side of the mirror.
Well, all right, said
Peace.
Alice.